soldiers marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ the royal master leads against the foe. Forward into battle, see his banners go. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Oh, for a faith that will not shrink, though pressed by every foe, that will not tremble on the brink of any earthly woe, that will not murmur or complain beneath a chastening rod, but in the hour of grief or pain will lean upon its God. A faith that shines more bright and clear when tempest rage without, that when in danger knows no fear, in darkness feels no doubt. Lord, give us such a faith as this, and then whate'er may come, we'll taste and hear the hallowed bliss of an eternal home. A charge to keep I have, a God to glorify, a never-dying soul to save, and fit it for the sky, to serve the present age, my calling to fulfill. Oh, may it all my powers engage to do my Master's will. Arm me with jealous care, as in thy sight to live, and O thy servant, Lord, prepare a strict account to give. Help me to watch and pray, and on thyself rely, assured if I my trust betray, I shall forever die. Rise up, O men of God, have done with lesser things. Give heart and mind and soul and strength to serve the King of Kings. Rise up, O men of God, his kingdom tarries long. Bring in the day of brotherhood and end the night of wrong. Rise up, O men of God, the church for you doth wait. Her strength unequal to her task, rise up and make her great. Lift high the cross of Christ, tread where his feet have trod, as brothers of the Son of Man, rise up, O men of God.
What?
Well, we hope you have been edified by our stream tonight. That way, we got to do that. We got to do that one of these nights. Just simply begin with our ending and confuse the
Oh.
shitting out of everybody. Good evening, Susan Stanley. Glad to have you here. Come on, CJ. That was funny.
That
Look at my bud.
confuzzled me.
What?
That confuzzled me.
I know. You should have seen the look on your face.
I got it shared to my usual places.
Bible. There's
Hello,
Sam.
Sam.
Hi. Hi.
Hi, Sheila.
You think so? Are you sure?
Should we get right into it?
Well, we are late. I know. It's just my head's pounding. I wasn't sure whether I really wanted to even come in tonight, but I decided to do it anyway. Sam says, "Did you know Sam pulled a Levi yesterday and got in trouble with Facebook?" I have yet to get in much trouble with Facebook. I've never landed in Facebook jail. I know that's coming though. Susan said, "I don't know if you saw my post, but I am still cancer free. Praise God. Glory, hallelujah." How does that one go? Well, amen. Amen.
Praise
Praise
God.
God. Sing
Give thanks
to the Father in all that we
to
say and do. Well, amen. Amen. Sing glory, hallelujah. Christ the Lord is risen today. Susan said, "Yes, I did." Ouch. My
Yeah,
daughter is
everybody knows I pulled a Levi.
my daughter is the one that gives me my Victoza medicine, which has to be injected daily. And she is fast becoming a nurse Cratchit because you're not supposed to be pulling on the every which way on the needle, girl. Oof. That's going to leave a bruise. And I don't want to have another one right there. Oh. Normally, we try to take care of that right as soon as I get home from route, so that everybody doesn't have to see me get my injection. But someone has been getting later and later.
Yes. Yes.
I don't
Sam, no guarantee that I won't pull another Levi tomorrow. Because you have been left in my charge tomorrow also.
Yes. As a matter of fact, the only day that you are not in his charge is actually Wednesday. Because guess what? We are so short-handed, they had to rope me into taking the pre-K to the park on Friday at 10 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
So guess what I get to do? I get to take the pre-K my choices were either to take the pre-K to the park at 10 on Friday or to take the track team to Des Moines to run in the state track. We had 34 finalists on the high school side, and I think somewhere close to that of the junior high that decided they wanted to go and run. Now, junior highs do not qualify. They just simply, okay, if you want to run, then you can come down and run. They have junior high state, but it's not a qualifying. You don't have to qualify for the state. It's just simply, hey, we're going to have a state track meet. So if you want to come, here you go. And normally for junior high, we may have 3 or 4, maybe 5 kids that want to go, in which case, hey, they can find their own way. The parents can take them down in their own vehicles. At most, we may provide a Suburban for them to go down. No. We've got to have somewhere in between 25 to 30 people and 30 kids that want to go. So guess what we have to do?
But
I said, I'm not doing it.
why?
Well, I've not been to state track yet, and I plan on keeping my record clean. I'm gonna win with my record.
You don't like track?
I love track. I don't like Des Moines. When you have every person and their dog in town for a state track meet. Sorry, ain't doing it. Nope, not gonna happen. Hey, Reba.
I got some sun today, can you tell?
Nope. You're still pale. Only a slighter reddish shade of it. I have a track record. My track record is unmatched. I have never been to Des Moines for the state track meet, and I am planning on maintaining my record. Thank you very much. Susan says that she's been giving herself insulin shots since 2012, and she gave them to her mother and dad in earlier years. She considers herself pretty experienced, but she still has bruises. I think some needles are just dull to begin with. That could be, but you see, my darling daughter, who desires to actually get into the nursing field, which I'm all encouraging, she has this propensity to, as soon as she puts the needle in, to pull down or to push upwards or draw it side to side with that needle while she's counting her 6 seconds before she has to pull it back out. And that hurts. It hurts really bad. Yeah, I did that.
Well, before the night gets away from us, Levi, we better
It's done gone. What are you talking about? It done left the building. You have no control about whether you can hold it back or not.
I guess so.
We're in Acts chapter 19, I believe.
Yes. Still.
Not for much longer. I think didn't we leave off with Demetrius's speech? She in 27? Yeah, 27.
We got hung up in 21.
Nah, you guys did. But I was actually down in 26. I think you and I talked about 21, though, didn't we? Oh, I know what it was. We got hung up in the idea of Paul not listening to the Spirit.
Yeah.
Susan says maybe she's looking away and moving it. It's some of that, yes, some of that's happening. A lot of it is she's leaning over to administer this because I'm sitting down rather than standing up, and I'm not at her same height, so some of that has to play in the fact.
Yeah.
So anyway, but Yeah, and we tabled that. You and I tabled that for personal study together later. So we are still moving on, and we're headed down. Even then, we were still down into 26, and we were covering Demetrius's speech when we got hung up with that.
Yeah.
So you take away the. You go ahead and do us a review, and we'll.
I don't even have a map. It probably would be helpful if I had my map out.
Yeah, we're in Ephesus.
You know,
It's on the coast of Asia Minor.
so we're at Ephesus, and he purposed, Paul purposed in the spirit, whatever. Wow, well, whatever that means. To pass through Macedonia and Achaia and go to Jerusalem and then go to Rome. And I talked about a little bit how that meshes with Romans 15 that we studied about a month ago, where Paul talks about this that trip there. But that's his plan. In Ephesus, there is a stir. A certain man, Demetrius, a silversmith, made silver shrines to the goddess of the Ephesians, Diana, and basically he says this Paul guy is bad for business because he's talking about the way, talking about Jesus, and so Paul, he says in verse 20, wait a minute, is that you? 26?
Well, we were covering the speech, so you can go. We had read the speech, so go ahead and finish up.
So he says, Demetrius says, moreover, you've seen here that not only in Ephesus, but all throughout parts of Asia, this guy is causing trouble. And he's put this trade in danger, and also that he's despised Diana and her magnificence, whom all Asian world worship. This guy, Paul Demetrius, says is bad news. He is disrupting your worship and proclaiming things that are against your goddess.
It's interesting as we pick up in 26 and 25 through 27 that Demetrius acknowledges that what he makes is God's. If you notice here in verse 26, that Paul hath persuaded and turned away much people, saying that they be no gods which are made with hands. So what's he making? Demetrius is a silversmith. He makes gods with his hands.
Right. He makes idols. Is Alicia able to put up the Bible, or am
I don't know
on
what's going on in there. If she's in the office, she had better be. Alicia.
Wow, real quick there.
We know what she was doing, and it was not what she was supposed to be doing.
We are in Acts 19.
19 verse 26, right?
Yeah, 25 through 27, that section.
So here in the NKJV, it still kind of says the same thing. They are God, not gods which are made with hands. Give me the ASV. I want to see how closely the translations match. Alicia, you should know enough to select the verse. Okay. She's laughing in there. They are no gods that are made with hands. ESV. That gods made with hands are not gods. Hello. Randy says, hello, fellow Americans, and CJ. I'm like, wait a minute here. Wait a minute. CJ's an American too, isn't he?
Unless you know something I don't.
Oh, so as we look here, then, Demetrius is, and I kind of like the way that ESV renders this. Gods made with hands are not gods. Essentially, idols, these statues, are not gods, is what he's saying. And this is what Demetrius is quoting Paul's words. You and I can read this and can actually hear Paul saying this exact thing, can't we?
Well, he almost says this, not exactly, but he says a similar thing in Athens in chapter 17.
Pretty much, yeah.
He's not God's not worshipped with man's hands as though he needed anything, and that he gives life and breath to all things.
And so then Demetrius draws the conclusion, and rightly so, that if this trend continues, if Paul continues keeping up this preaching, that their craft is in danger. Their livelihood is in danger because they have made much gain by their skill, their craft in metalwork, making these statuettes, these idols of Diana. And yes, Diana was the patron goddess of the Ephesians. Now, what would you do if your craft, if your livelihood was hindered by some law? Wouldn't you be up in arms too? If someone came into your area teaching a new, or well, let's put it this way. When the horse and buggy came along, well, not the horse and buggy, when the Model A came along, or the horseless carriage rather, at first it took such a long time to gain traction, but there was a great amount of pushback. Why? Well, it's because those who made profit off of the sale of buggies, off of the sale of horses, off of all of manner of the different crafts that are associated with horses and buggy, and the horse and buggy trade, were in fear that their livelihood was in danger. And do we still have horse and buggy as a means of transportation today? Yes, the Amish do it quite frequently. Is it to the same degree? Absolutely not, right? In fact, the cars have so outstripped and replaced the horse and buggy that there literally is almost nothing left of that industry. Randy says, if I thought a weird person showed up and attacked my livelihood teaching something crazy, yes. COVID and government regulations were an attack on many, and that's exactly right. And there was a big outcry about that. And many places, they were able to get or make changes that affected or that resulted in a reversal, and in other places they weren't, and look what happened. So they were right to be in fear of their livelihood, and I can't say as I blame them, but at the same time they're wrong, because what are they making livelihood of?
A false god.
They're making profit off of men's souls.
Right.
Right? So we can also look at today, and we can see many different, we can see this still going on today. There are people that still worship false deities. I mean, we can look at Hinduism and its 500 different gods. We can look at Buddha and its one false god. We can look at the different pagan gods around the world, or the different wise men that have been elevated to deity, i.e. Confucianism and others. And there are even those who make profit off men's souls in Christianity. And they do it through icons. They do it through, and I'm talking icons in multiple senses. Whether you're talking about the statuettes that people will have in their homes that they make prayers through, quote unquote, or you're talking about those religious symbolisms that people love to hang around their necks, or in their ears, or on their vehicles. You see, there's a lot of different things that we can take and elevate to the form of an idol. When you boil it right down to it, how often do you stop and consider that people have elevated the cross to an idol? So bear that in mind. We are to bear a cross, right? But where in the Bible does it say that we are to worship the cross? It's one of the reasons that I so rarely ever sing the old rugged cross. Because I'm going to be true to Christ, I won't be true to the cross. Some people say that seems a little bit different, or that seems a little odd. Well, without the cross, obviously, Christ would not have had the same, I mean, Christ's sacrifice wouldn't be exactly the same. But do I elevate the cross, or do I elevate the man that gave his life on it? And the obvious answer is we take the man on it, because he's the one that died for our sins. The cross was just the means, the tool by which it happened. So we need to be very aware of why we do what we do, why we sing what we sing, why we say what we say. But back on our topic over here, they were right to be scared of their livelihood, because that was exactly what was happening. They were their livelihood was in danger. In fact, it ended up dying out. Randy says, like wearing an electric chair makes no sense. Totally agree. It can be an idol. Why would we wear an electric chair? that would be kind of weird, but yes, it's exactly right. So let's move on down then. Now, Demetrius makes a point that if Paul continues, Diana's going to be despised. Her magnificence is going to be put to shame. It's going to be destroyed, and he makes the false assumption that the entire world worships this great goddess Diana. Well, we already know that the pantheon of Greek gods and goddesses were, I mean, when we use the word pantheon, we're talking about many. I mean, there were many. And all of Asia may have worshipped a good portion of may have mentioned Diana, but they didn't all worship Diana. We know the Egyptians didn't worship Diana, so we can make logical assumptions. But what Demetrius was doing was going for the shock factor. And how many times do we do the same thing? Have you ever gone for the shock factor? Well, there are times when we have been guilty of going for the shock factor. Like I've used the example of the one gentleman, the one brother who would approach a door, knock on it, and say, when the person, let me make my point, and then I'll get to you, would knock on the door, and when the door was answered, the first his opening salvo would be, "You're going to hell." What? Shock factor, right? Wouldn't that be an absolute shock to you? Or, are you ready to die? Don't say that in this day and age, right? Do not use that when you knock on a door. Go up to a door, knock on it, CJ, and go, "Are you ready to die?" Do not do that. That is the absolute wrong thing to say in this day and age.
I'm sure it would not go over well.
And it would be a total shock factor, right?
There's no way to use that phrase to start off without coming off.
So now we may not go to that extreme, but think of ways as CJ reads the next few verses. Let me see. Oh wait, we better do the cuteness overload. Okay. All right, you gonna go up? Do it. Night, night. Sleep tight. Stop tickling her. Sweet dreams. Come on, what's next? Love you. I love you too. Okay. Yes, you notice my cheek there. Still there. No, it's not peaceful sweat. It's peaceful rest. Peaceful. No. Rest. Okay, now what's the last one? God bless. God bless you. Night, sweetie.
Good night, Reba. Good night.
Sam.
Sam, good night.
Randy.
Randy, good night, CJ.
And Susan.
Susan.
And anyone else? Randy says, rest well, little princesses. Reba says, good night, sweet girls. And Sam says, but a guy walked down the road trying to look like a girl and tells him God finds to be. That would be a shock factor as well. Yes, that would be a shock factor as well. All right. And Susan says, good night, sweet dreams. All right. So let's see here. We're going to pick up in verse 28 and let's
Do we want to try and read the rest of the story here?
yeah, well, we could.
Or
That's quite a bit of.
Or break it up a little bit more.
I was thinking of breaking it up again, and let's go down to 34.
Right. Now when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, great is Diana of the Ephesians. So the whole city was filled with confusion and rushed into the theater with one accord, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's travel companions. And when Paul wanted to go into the people, the disciples would not allow it. Then some of the officials of Asia, who were his friends, sent to him, pleading that he would not venture into the theater. Some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward, and Alexander motioned with his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people. But when they found out that he was a Jew, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, great is Diana of the Ephesians.
All right. So as we see here in verse 28, Demetrius' shock factor worked. His shocking words did exactly what he wanted to do, and that is to engender or to create wrath, anger within those who was listening to him, and they became so angered that they started essentially screaming out, "Great is Artemis and great is Diana of the Ephesians." Another word was for Diana. Diana is the Greek, or is the Roman, and Artemis is the Greek, I think, or it's vice versa. What? Artemis is the Greek. Yes, Diana is the Roman, and Artemis is the Greek version of the same goddess. And so the whole city then, hearing all this noise of these craftsmen screaming how great is Diana or Artemis of the Ephesians, they're wondering what's going on. They're like, what's going on? What's happening? And so they all rush to the theater. And those who are angry are bringing Gaius and Aristarchus, who are Macedonians and were Paul's companions with them. Paul's command, yeah, and they bring with them Paul's companions, which is interesting. Okay, there it is. Gaius and Aristarchus, men of Macedonia. I have some of these numbered, and I don't know why I have these numbered, because I don't have the numbering labeled down here for some reason. Anyway, so they drag them into the theater with them to try to figure out what's going on. So here's an uproar, and they don't have Paul, they just have Gaius and Aristarchus, who they know to have been with Paul. And so Paul, hearing the noise, is going to go in and try to, do his normal Paul thing, which is speak to the people, right? But he's prevented by the disciples. You have to wonder, why this is not the first time that the disciples have prevented him from going into a crowd of angry people. Can you remember one other place? CJ's thinking. I'd do the Jeopardy theme, but but it would cost me too much.
We would probably get flagged.
That's right.
I can't remember off the top of my head. Where was it? I can remember this instance.
Acts chapter 17. No, that's not the one I was thinking of, but that was one of them where they were not in the same group.
Is that one where the disciples were running in Acts 17? Or no?
No, they send him away quietly, secretly in Acts 17. But it might have been in 16. No, because that's where they take him and beat him.
Yeah. And then the Romans want to send him away secretly there in 16.
In 17, they couldn't find Paul.
I thought this was a unique instance.
There is one where they wouldn't let him go in, an additional one.
Okay.
let's see here. 1710, they send Paul and Silas to Berea. In 1714, they send Paul and Paul, as if by sea. They send him, but they send him over land, whereas they then left Silas and Timothy there.
Randy said Acts 14.
Um, where was it? Check out 14 for me, would you?
Yeah, I'm checking it. I don't think it's there.
Yeah.
Oh, what are you thinking of? Well, this is close, but when in Acts 15 they're at Jerusalem and Paul starts speaking, and then Peter has to kind of interrupt him and explain some things about the Gentiles, and then Paul
No,
finishes later.
no, that's among our brethren, so that wouldn't have been it. I know that there was a similar incident to this, but when Paul was actually drugged before the council in Acts chapter, or before the uh, deputy in Acts 18, where he was there at Achaia, and he was about to open his mouth and make mention or make defense when Galileo told him to shut up and get him out from in front of him. It wasn't a matter it wasn't a civil matter, so they needed to get out of there, and
Right.
so they took Sosthenes, the chief ruler, and beat him. But
You have me stumped.
yeah, there was one though that they.
Do you know where he was at?
Well, it was right within these, and I was thinking it was the one here in 17 where they were dealing with the with Justin or Jason rather, but evidently I misspoke that. Because they had the wrong address in 17. Huh. Anyway,
what I was gonna say here, 19 is I think the disciples are the easiest reason I think is they didn't want Paul to get tore up by the crowd, you know. Here's this riot and this raving, he, almost like a mob mentality, you know.
right, and that was a very real possibility.
You never know with that type of mob mob mentality. It's almost if reason goes out the window. You know?
It's one of the reasons that I agree with a certain author that I had read. Um, it was actually in a science fiction book that I had read a long time ago. One of the main characters, or secondary characters, I should say, to the main character. Oh man, made the statement that individually people have great intelligence, but but when you have them in a crowd, people are stupid. And the reason that he said that, I don't have the quote exactly right, and I'm doing that on purpose, but um, basically the reason he said that is because when you have them in a crowd, what you see is people not knowing where the leaders are going or what they're doing. They simply end up following because everybody else around them are doing it. And this is something that has been proven time and time again by various studies out there. In fact, I remember one Dateline study or anyway, one of the, I think it was Dateline, TV show, TV investigative journalist type of a program did a study where they had this doctor's office, and they tested people to see how far they were willing to go to follow things. And so what they had was what they started out with, okay, is in the morning they had an actress waiting in the waiting room, and at certain intervals there would a noise come on the intercom, a dong or whatever, and she would stand every time she heard that. And the as customers came in and filed through, or clients, however, or patients, however you want to say them, they would be sitting there, and that dong would go off, and she would stand, and they would start looking around. And first they would kind of smirk at her, but before too long, and it would go off at regular intervals, like, every 10 minutes or something like that. Pretty soon they would be up standing as well. And eventually she left. But this behavior continued on for the rest of the day. Now, why was that? The person who began it had left, but it had become, because it happened at regular intervals, and the first person did it, and the other ones suddenly didn't want to be seen as if they were left out. They would follow along. And others came in and they'd see everybody else doing it, and so they did the same thing, and it continued throughout the day. It's because people do not want to be left out, and you have the herd mentality going on. People, when you get them together, are stupid.
That's right.
They don't use the faculty of thinking, of critical thinking. But if you have them apart and they're only, it's only them, then suddenly that re-engages, and they begin to think critically and say, okay, well, why did I do this? Or why should I do this? And so people individually are smart. And, a person is smart, but people together can be stupid.
Right.
Randy says 17:10 through 15. I was looking at that. Paul and Silas are in the synagogue of the Jews. Then the Bereans are more noble, and many of them believed, which was the honorable women and Greeks, men not a few. Now the Jews from Thessalonica come running thither. They stirred up the people, And so then the people send, the brothers send Paul away and keep Paul and Silas, or Silas and Timothy. But that doesn't really. But there was one in my that runs in my head very similar to Acts 19, where they again prevented him, and that doesn't really follow that. So I'll have to just go back and try to look it up for next week as we continue to try to get through the rest of this.
I was gonna say you were talking about this herd mob mentality. That's exactly what you see in verse 32, is it not? Some cried one thing, some another, because there was great confusion. And Luke says, and most didn't even know what they were doing there.
Absolutely, that is exactly what we're dealing with when we look at it. Is that herd mentality, that mob mentality? The reason I call it a herd mentality is because it was noted. It's one of the reasons of what settled or what transpired in the Old West, which was called the cattle drives. If they wanted the cows to go a certain direction, they would look for the lead cow. There was always one cow or bull that led the entire rest of the herd. And if they and it wouldn't take long for that cow to assert dominance, or that bull, that bovine, let's put it that way. And once it had asserted that dominance, whether it would, all the rest of them would follow, even to the point of you could begin stampedes just by getting a few of them going.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you got that one or the other one. But you see, the whole thing is if you got the lead one going, everyone else followed. If you got a few of the other cows going in one direction, that's what caused a stampede. Because if you startled one or two of them, pretty soon everybody else would be going and running in the same direction those other cows were going. And a very dangerous situation occurs with a stampede. What you see when Jesus was being tried is that same mentality, that mob. And what you see here is, again, a mob having grown, because a mob is a very organic thing. It's one or two leaders who propel the rest of the group into acting against their better judgment, against nature. Sam says we as Christians got to be careful, because if you get surrounded with nothing but darkness, we have to be careful not to be a follower. Hosea says no one knew exactly what was going on. They didn't understand the reason of the circumstances. They were just there because of all the shouting and the confusion, the noise. Randy says, just like if you do a bus drill, have to remain focused. Kids can do more harm in an emergency if the bus driver doesn't keep it going right. And that's exactly right. As the bus driver, I have to remain calm. I have to remain focused, because what I project, the kids pick up on. So if I am nervous, if I am scared, if I am panicked and not thinking, well, the kids are going to pick up on that, and they're going to react accordingly. In the bus drills that I've conducted this year, I've had several pre-K on my bus, and which we have to do bus drills with all of the kids that would ride on our bus, or the majority of them on the bus. And that as soon as you shut that key off and you start to unstrap and you say, All right, kids, this is a bus drill. We are doing an emergency evacuation. Those pre-K do not understand what's going on, and their fear ratchets up from a 1 to a 201 in 1.3 seconds flat. If I project panic and fear, that goes even higher, to where we have screaming and we have crying and we have a total shutdown, lockdown of the kid, immobilized, unable to function and to move. So I have to be careful what I project. Man, Sam says, learn to go. Teens have got tons of peer pressure by the crowd, and we have to teach them not to follow others. But they do follow others just so that they're not left out. O'Shea says the bus driver is in control of an ever-present potential miniature mob full of potentially unrestricted or unrestrained energy source. True that.
I wanted to go back to your point of
Sure.
the mob. They didn't really know where they were gathered. It reminds me of, you watch a movie like The Beauty and the Beast or Shrek, and you have mob scenes, and then it cuts to a person's house, and they see the lights going, and they're shouting, and what do? They don't know what's going on. They just pick up a pitchfork, a torch, and run out the door shouting, "Get him! Get him!" Why? Because everybody's doing it, so it must be important. But they don't know why.
And how do the other people, how do the ones that they're going up against react? Usually with fear and confusion.
Yeah.
But what we have here is some people crying out one thing, some another, and they don't know what they're there for. But they have Aristarchus and Gaius from Macedonia, which by their very names, we know they're not Jews. Gaius and Aristarchus are Greek names. They are from a Greek town, Macedonia. Yet you notice what happens. They in verse 33, they pull out Alexander. Now, this is not Paul's crowd that puts forth Alexander. Who is it that puts forth Alexander?
Some of the crowd that's already yelling and screaming, I think.
Not necessarily. I was just checking to see if he mentioned anything about Paul's heritage, but it doesn't. Because what we see here is that in verse 33, the Jews are the ones that are putting him forward. The Jews are putting forth Alexander to make a defense to the crowd. Do you suppose it would be because Paul looks like a Jew?
Right.
That would be a safe assumption, wouldn't it?
And I probably wanted to tame this crowd before it really got, well, I'd say really got out of control, but they're already crying out for 2 hours, so some most of that city already knows about this commotion.
Well, I'm going to back up just a minute because there was one point I forgot to mention, and that's in verse 31. Verse 30 ends with some of the disciples preventing Paul from entering into the theater. And even some of, it says the Asiarchs, which is a funny name. I don't know why the ESV does that. But anyway, you and I would say some of the chief men of Asia. Okay? We're talking high muckety mucks of Asia, of the province of what we know as Asia Minor. Okay? They send to Paul. These were some of Paul's friends. Paul was not a man without connections. If you're dealing with, do you notice how often it has said chief women, chief men throughout Paul's journey this time? In Thessalonica, in Berea, in Macedonia, he has people that are the chief women and the chief Greeks. And obviously, if you have some of the chief women, you've got some of the chief men on your side.
Probably, that speaks to the connections he's made when he was a student under
Gamaliel?
Gamaliel.
No. Gamaliel was situated in Jerusalem. Had nothing to do with Asia. Gamaliel was a Pharisee, and he spent his time in the temple. He was a teacher of the law. He was a Pharisee. He was part of the Sanhedrin or the Jewish council. Paul, however, was from what city? Tarsus. His father was a Greek, or rather, his father was a Roman citizen, as well as a Jew, because his father was of the tribe of Benjamin. So his father had connections. If you're a Roman-born citizen, that means you are not a pauper. You're not a poor person by any means. But this is many, many, many moons down the road. Okay, many years down the road. And Paul has been through many different cities. He's been all over Asia Minor, wheresoever the Spirit wants to allow him to go. Because remember, there was a couple of spots here on this trip that he was not allowed to go. But he had made friends in high places and low places. He had become all things to all men, he wrote to the Corinthians around this time. Okay. So he was a tent maker. He had many different contacts through his work, through his ministry, and it shows us another aspect of Paul. He was not a rough, sandpapery type of guy. He had friends, right?
Right.
So, and yes, Sam, you can go to Philippians and you can read how Paul was, pretty sure it's Philippians, was a man of Benjamin.
Philippians 3.
Thank you. Philippians 3. Man of Benjamin.
Philippians.
Now, so Paul had friends and he had brethren who both of them said, do not risk yourself in this theater. And so some people are crying something, some people crying another. The assembly's confused, but that confusion is beginning to narrow in on the Jews. And we can see this for the simple fact that some of the crowd prompted Alexander, a Jew, who the Jew put forward, motioning and trying to make his defense, but the opposite side saw that he was a Jew. Now, what's known about the Jews? Let's leave out their stiff-necked and stubbornness. What's known about the Jews?
They're God's people, and they hate Gentiles.
How many gods do they worship?
One.
Do they believe in idolatry?
Depends on who you ask.
At this time in Jewish history, are they known to be idol worshippers?
No.
So they are against idolatry because these are Jews who have finally, in essence, learned the error of their ways to a degree, and have turned back towards God, especially after the Babylonian captivity. No, I do not have an idea. It's been a good number of years, probably at least well over, I would say, at least 2 decades. But I can't say for sure, Randy, how long he's been a believer. You would need to go through certain each of the places that he visited and see how long he spent, a year here, 2 years there, 3 years or more. And some places it just says he continued a certain time. I think Corinth was a year and 6 months. But Ephesus or someplace, was it Ephesus? I want to say Ephesus was 3 years, but
I think so, yeah.
so it's really hard to say. But we do know that he spent 3 years, roughly, from between the time of Damascus and the time that he goes up to Jerusalem and meets with Peter and James and the church there, wherein he meets Barnabas and then goes off to Tarsus, I believe, and that's through his own words. So I'm safe. I feel very comfortable in saying that he's been at least 2 decades as a Christian by this time. So the people see that Alexander is a Jew, and they know that the Jews are against idolatry, which means they're already against Diana. And of course, that sets them off for another 2 hours of great is Diana, great is Artemis, great is, and you want to try it for the last bit, or you want to call it and leave it for tomorrow, for next week?
We're already at hour 15, so I
think one more push and we'll get it done, so that next week would be fine.
Yeah.
So we'll pick up at 35 next week, but we're going to leave them off with a cliffhanger. Great is Diana. Yeah, right. Just great enough for the rubbish heap of history. But one of the things to remember is when we do something, we need to make sure that we're doing it for the right reason, not just simply because we want to follow along to get along.
That's right.
God has never called us to disengage our minds us when we follow him. In fact, when we hear the gospel, he says we must hear the gospel. It's not going to go in one ear and out the other. No. It needs to go into our ear, and we need to understand. Hear with our ears and understand. We need to see with our eyes and truly see. Listen. And then we need to believe with our hearts. So there's always an action that needs to happen, and it's on an individual basis. Because you and I are responsible on an individual basis. We will never have the excuse, well, everybody else was doing it, so it must have been okay.
That's right.
No, God has called each and every one, as many as are willing to obey.
Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:10 that we're all gonna appear before the judgment seat of Christ, but it's to give an account to what each one has done in his own body. I'm not going to be accountable for Levi and
Rats.
things he's done, and he's not going to be accountable for me on the day of judgment. We're
Praise the
going
Lord.
we're going to stand on our own 2 feet.
You know, in the Old Testament, under the Deuteronomical law, yeah, I know, I just butchered that.
Is that a theological phrase?
That is an actual word. Deuteronomical.
Deuteronomical law?
Yeah. Deuteronomical. Something like that. I know I butchered it, but anyway, it's something to that effect. God specifically told the Israelites in Deuteronomy. I'm trying to locate it really quickly. That each of us are going to be responsible for our own sin. I'm going to say that's in the 20. He says, yep, it is. It's 24, verse 16. You got that, Ezra? Deuteronomy 24:16. Moses, by inspiration, says, "The fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall the children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin." In other words, you have an individual responsibility regarding your sin. And that means you have an individual responsibility to hear the commands of God, the call of God. You have an individual responsibility in how you react and respond to God's law. That's in the Old Testament. CJ already pointed out the New Testament. We're all going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ, and we are going to give an account for the deeds that you and I, for that you do, and I'm going to give an account for the deeds that I do. And what we see in Ephesus, as well as in other places, The people who let others decide end up regretting what happens.
That's right.
In the case of, for example, what we read in the Let's Read the Whole Bible, y'all, tonight, Mark chapters 15 and 16, we see a mob shouting, "Crucify him," to Christ, the innocent King of the Jews, the King of the entire world, God's anointed. And they ended up regretting it. We see that very plainly in Acts chapter 2, when Peter confronts them with their sin. Let all the house of Israel know assuredly that God hath made this same Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ. And they that heard him were pricked in their heart, and they cried out, "Men and brethren, what shall we do?" Well, those who shut off their brains and give their will over to a mob end up regretting it. You and I have an individual responsibility. If we want to make it to heaven, it is entirely dependent upon us to react and respond to God's gospel call. If we don't, we won't. Jesus says, "Enter in ye at the straight gate." He commands that. It's an imperative statement. In English, an imperative statement means you do. That's the best, most simplest way to put it. An imperative is a command. You enter in at the straight gate. You strive to enter in at the straight gate, for broad is the way and wide is the gate that leadeth unto destruction, and many there be that go in thereat. For straight is the gate and narrow is the way. Straight is the way and narrow is I had it right. Straight is the gate and narrow is the way that leadeth unto life eternal, and few there be that find it. Matthew chapter 7, 13 and 14. Our goal is always, as always, to edify you.
Before I do that, I want to clarify one thing I said. We will have to stand on our own 2 feet before judgment, but that's not all. If it was only based on what I could do on my own 2 feet, I would go to hell. I mean, yes, we're gonna give an account, but we also have the blood of Christ that cleanses us, that makes us holy in the eyes of God. So I wanted to clarify that before.
Good point.
No.
I think that's a very good point, because we are not standing alone before the judgment seat of Christ. Those who have the blood of Christ stand with Christ.
That's right.
Plain and simple. It's nothing that you and I can do. We must respond, absolutely. But it is through our response that we receive the grace. Because we respond, we say, "Yes, we want your grace. We are willing to do whatever you command us to do, God." And because of our response, our asking for God's grace, our obedience to God's grace. Hey, you lost your background.
Yeah, I did that on purpose.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Many get the wrong impression that we can work our way into heaven. We cannot. But without doing the work that God has commanded us, we will never get into heaven.
Amen.
That seems to be a kind of a oxymoron, but it is never my work. It is the work that God demands that will ensure that our salvation is sure.
Amen.
Because there's nothing I can do. Nothing. I'm just an unprofitable servant.
Amen.
But I'm a servant. We often forget the fact that we are servants. Do we not? What is a servant? Someone who sits around and twiddles his thumb and whistles Dixie.
No, someone who works for the master.
Works for the master. Does what the master commands. Servants are different than slaves, by the way. Servants still have a choice. Slaves don't.
That's right.
And that's really a fascinating study. If you really want to study that, look up the difference. I mean, the word doulos, which is what is used in the Greek in the New Testament, has 3 different meanings. And here's another homework assignment for you, Randy, if you ever wanted one. That is, look up the word doulos and compare its different meanings, because there is slave, like you point out, there is servant, like I have mentioned, and then there is bond servant. And the bond servant is the one that we have, is where we have the greatest affinity for the song Pierce My Ear, because that's what a bond servant is. Someone who has willingly, out of love and dedication, said, I do not wish to go out from service to my Lord. And so the Lord takes him to the door and pierces his ear in the presence of witnesses. And he becomes a bondservant, someone who is higher than a slave, yet lower than a servant, because he can't leave. Fascinating study.
So before we go, was that the point you wanted to make?
Yeah, I'm done.
Because the reason why I done it in the background is because I want to remind you all, come on now.
It ain't focusing.
Yeah, because I have a blurred background on.
Yeah, but that's in the foreground.
So, I want to remind you all that this class is coming up. His Eternal Plan. We'll be going through this workbook starting Tuesday nights, June the 6th. His Eternal Plan by Jerry Tallman. If you would like a book, get with me in Messenger and I will send you a link to where you can purchase this. And I hope y'all will have time to get your books in before we start. So, but that's my little plug. I'll be plugging this more often since we're closer. But thank you all for joining. And remember, here at CM, we want to do 3 things. We want to glorify God, edify you, the saints, and answer any spiritual questions you may have. His eternal plan, Sam.
Play it again, Sam. His eternal plan. CJ doesn't even know what that one comes from.
Nope.
But Randy and Sam know what movie that comes from. Play it again, Sam. The movie Casablanca. Randy says, "Have a good night, all. 4-fold laundry." Don't forget those creases. And hopefully we have done just that, edified you through our study of the book of Acts tonight. And even with our little bit of shenanigans, we hope you've been blessed. We only had a little bit tonight, but it was still fun. That way, whether we wake tomorrow to serve God here on this earth, or we wake tomorrow to serve him up there, only Sam knows because he's already in tomorrow. But anyway, whether we wake to serve him up there, you know where we'll be.